Chapter 11? 11. Here come the judge. DA judge. Here come the judge. Whoever undertakes to set himself up as a judge of truth and knowledge is shipwrecked by the laughter of the gods, quoth Albert Einstein. O my soul, be prepared for him who knows how to ask questions. T.S. Eliot. Mac followed the trail that wound past the waterfall away from the lake and through a dense patch of cedar trees. It took less than 5 minutes to reach an impasse. The path took him directly to Rock Face, the faint outline of a door barely visible on the surface. Obviously, he was meant to enter, so he hesitantly reached out and pushed. His hand simply penetrated the wall as if it wasn't there. Mac continued to move cautiously forward until his entire body passed through what appeared to be the solid stone exterior of the mountain. It was thick black within, and he could see nothing. Taking a deep breath, and with his hands outstretched in front of him, he ventured a couple of steps into the inky darkness and stopped. Fear seized him as he tried to breathe, unsure whether or not to continue. As his stomach clenched, he felt it again. The great sadness settling on his shoulders with its full weight, almost suffocating him. He desperately wanted to back out into the light, but in the end, he believed that Jesus would not have sent him here without a purpose, without a good purpose. He pressed in farther. Slowly his eyes recovered from the shock of moving from daylight into such deep shadows, and a minute later they adjusted enough to make out a single passageway curving off to his left. As he followed it, the brightness at the entrance behind him faded and was replaced by a faint luminosity reflecting off the walls from somewhere ahead. Within 100 feet, the tunnel turned abruptly to his left, and Mac found himself standing at the edge of what he seemed was a huge cavern. Although initially it seemed to be only vast, empty space. Within 100 feet, the tunnel turned abruptly to his left, and Mac found himself standing at the edge of what he assumed was a huge cavern, although initially it seemed to be only vast, empty space. The illusion was magnified by the only light present, a dim radiance that encircled him, but dissipated within 10 feet in every direction. Beyond that, he could see nothing, only inky blackness. The air in the place felt heavy and oppressive, with an attending chill that fought to take his breath away. He looked down and was relieved to see a faint reflection off a surface. Not the dirt and rock of the tunnel, but a floor smooth and dark like polished mica. Bravely taking a step forward, he noticed that the light circle moved with him, illuminating a little more of the area ahead. Feeling more confident, he began to slowly and deliberately walk in the direction he had been facing, focusing on the floor for fear it might at any moment drop away beneath him. He was so intent on watching his feet that Mac blundered into an object in front of him and almost fell. It was a chair, a comfortable looking wooden chair in the middle of nothing. Mac quickly decided to sit and wait. As he did, the light that had assisted him continued to move forward as if he had kept walking. Directly in front of him, he now could make out an ebony desk of considerable size, completely bare, and then he jumped when the light coalesced on the spot, and he finally saw her. Behind the desk sat a tall, beautiful, olive-skinned woman with chiseled, Hispanic features, clothed in a darkly colored, flowing robe. She sat as straight and regal as a high court judge. She was breathtakingly stunning. She is beauty, he thought. Everything that sensuality, everything that sensuality strives to be, but falls painfully short. In the dim light, it was difficult to see where her face began, as her hair and robe framed and merged into her visage. Her eyes glinted and glistened as if they were portals into the vastness of the starry night sky, reflecting some unknown light source within her. He dared not speak, afraid that his voice would simply be swallowed up in the intensity of the room's focus on her. He thought, I'm Mickey Mouse about to speak to Pavarotti. The thought made him smile, as if somehow sharing a simple delight in the grotesqueness of that image. She smiled back, and the place noticeably brightened. That was all it took for Mac to understand that he was expected and welcome here. She looked strangely familiar, as if he might have known or glimpsed her somewhere in the past, only he knew that he had never truly seen or met her before. May I ask, if I may, who are you? Mac fumbled, his voice sounding every bit to him like Mickey. Barely leaving hello, boys and girls. Barely leaving an impression on the stillness of the room, but then lingering like the shadow of an echo. She ignored his query. Do you understand why you are here? Like a breeze sweeping away the dust, her voice gently ushered his question out of the room. Mac could almost feel her words rain down on his head and melt into his spine, sending delicious tingles everywhere. He shivered and decided that he never wanted to speak again. He only wanted her to talk, to speak to him or anyone, just as long as he could be present. But she waited. You know, he said quietly, his own voice suddenly so rich and resonant that Mac was tempted to look behind him to see who had spoken. Somehow he knew that what he had said was the truth. You know, he said quietly. Do you understand why you're here? You know, blah, blah, blah. It simply sounded like it. I have no idea, he added, fumbling again and turning his gaze toward the floor. No one told me. Well, Mackenzie, Allen, Phillips, she laughed, causing him to look up quickly. I'm here to help you. If a rainbow makes a sound, or a flower, as it grows, that was the sound of her laughter. It was a shower of light, an invitation to talk, and Mac chuckled along with her, not even knowing or caring why. Soon again there was silence, and her face, though remaining soft, took on a fiery intensity, as if she was able to peer deep inside of him, past the pretenses and facades, down to the places that are rarely, if ever, spoken of. Today is a very serious day with very serious consequences. She paused, as if to add weight to her already tangibly heavy words. Mackenzie, you are here in part because of your children, but you are also here for my children. Mac interrupted. What do you mean I'm here because of my children? Mackenzie, you love your children in a way that your own father was never able to love you and your sisters. Of course I love my children. Every parent loves their children, Mac asserted, but why does that have anything to do with why I'm here? In some sense, every parent does love their children, she responded, ignoring his second question. But some parents are too broken to love them well, and others are barely able to love them at all. You should understand that, but you do love your children well, very, Well, I learned much of that from Nan. We know. But you did learn, didn't you? I suppose I did. Excuse me. Among the mysteries of a broken humanity, that too is rather remarkable. To learn, to allow change. She was as calm as a windless sea. So then, Mackenzie, may I ask, which of your children do you love the most? Max smiled inside as the kids had come along. He had wrestled to an answer to this very question. I don't love any one of them more than any of the others. I love each of them differently, he said, choosing his words carefully. Explain that to me, Mackenzie, she asked with interest. Well, each one of my children is unique, and that uniqueness and special personhood calls out a unique response from me. Max settled back into his chair. I remember after John, my first, was born. I was so captivated by the wonder of who this little life was that I actually worried about whether I would have anything left to love a second child. But when Tyler came along, it was as if he brought with him a special gift for me, a whole new capacity to love him especially. Come to think of it, it's like when Papa says she is especially fond of someone. When I think of each of my children individually, I find that I am especially fond of each one. Well said, Mackenzie. Her appreciation was tangible. But then she leaned forward slightly, her tone still soft but serious. But what about when they do not behave, or they make choices other than those you would want them to make, or they are just belligerent and rude? What about when they embarrass you in front of others? How does that affect your love for them? Mac responded slowly and deliberately. It doesn't really. He knew that what he was saying was true, even if Katie didn't believe it sometimes. I admit that it does affect me, and sometimes I get embarrassed or angry. But even when they act badly, they are still my son or my daughter. They are still Josh or Kate, and they will be forever. What they do might affect my pride, but not my love for them. She sat back, beaming. You are wise in the ways of real love, Mackenzie. So many believe that it is love that grows, but it is the knowing that grows, and love simply expands to contain it. Love is just the skin of knowing, Mackenzie. You love your children, whom you know so well, with a wonderful and real love. A little embarrassed at her praise, Mac looked down. Well, thanks. But I'm not that way with very many other people. My love tends to be pretty conditional most of the time. But it's a start, isn't it, Mackenzie? And you didn't move beyond your father's inability on your own. It was God and you together who changed you to love this way. And now you love your children much the way Father loves his. Matt could feel his jaw involuntarily clench as he listened, and he felt the anger once more begin to rise. What should have been a reassuring commendation seemed more like a bitter pill that he now refused to swallow. He tried to relax to cover his emotions, but by the look in her eyes, he knew it was too late. She mused. Something I said bother you, Mackenzie? Her gaze now made him uncomfortable. He felt exposed. Mackenzie, she encouraged, is there something you would like to say? The silence left by her question now hung in the air. Max struggled to retain his composure. He could hear his mother's advice ringing in his ears. If you don't have anything nice to say, better to not speak at all. Oh, Well, no, not really. Mackenzie, she prompted, this is not a time for your mother's common sense. This is a time for honesty, for truth. You don't believe what you don't believe that Father loves his children very well, do you? You don't believe that God is good, do you? Is Missy his child? Max snapped. Of course, she answered. Then no, he blurted, rising to his feet. I don't believe that God loves all of his children very well. He had said it, and now his accusation echoed off whatever walls surrounded the chamber, while Max stood there, angry and ready to explode. The woman remained calm and unchanging in her demeanor. Slowly, she rose from her high-backed chair, moving silently behind it and motioning him toward it. Why don't you sit here? Is that what honesty gets you? The hot seat? He muttered sarcastically, but he didn't move, simply staring back at her. Mackenzie, she remained standing behind her chair. Earlier, I began to tell you why you are here today. Not only are you here because of your children, but you are here for judgment. As the word echoed in the chamber, panic rose inside Mac like a swelling tide, and slowly he sank into his chair. Instantly he felt guilty as memories spilled through his mind like rats fleeing the rising flood. He gripped the arms of his chair, trying to find some balance in the onslaught of images and emotions. His failures as a human being suddenly loomed large, and in the back of his mind, he could almost hear a voice intoning his catalog of sins. His dread deepening as the list grew longer and longer. He had no defense. He was lost, and he knew it. Mackenzie, she began, only to be interrupted. Now I understand. I'm dead, aren't I? That's why I can see Jesus and Papa, because I'm dead. He sat back and looked up into the darkness, feeling sick to his stomach. I can't believe it. I didn't even feel anything. He looked at the woman who patiently watched him. How long have I been dead? He asked. Mackenzie, she began, I'm sorry to disappoint you, but you have not yet fallen asleep in your world, and I believe that you have missed again. Mac cut her off. I'm not dead. Now he was incredulous and stood again to his feet. You mean all this is real and I'm still alive, but I thought you said I came here for judgment. I did, she stated matter-of-factly, a look of amusement on her face, but judgment, and I'm not dead. A third time he stopped her, processing what he heard, anger replacing his panic. This hardly seems fair. He knew his emotions were not helping. Does this happen to other people? Getting judged, before they're even dead? What if I change? What if I do better the rest of my life? What if I repent? What then? Is there something you wish to repent of, Mackenzie? She asked, unfazed by his outburst. Max slowly sat back down. He looked at the smooth surface of the floor and then shook his head before answering. I wouldn't know where to begin, he mumbled. I'm quite a mess, aren't I? Yes, you are. Mac looked up and she smiled back. You are a glorious, destructive mess, Mackenzie, but you're not here to repent, at least not in the way that you understand. Mackenzie, you are not here to be judged. But he interrupted again. I thought you said that I was here for judgment. She remained cool and placid as a summer breeze as she finished his question. I did, but you are not on trial here. Mac took a deep breath, relieved at her words. You will be the judge. Excuse me. The knot in his stomach returned as he realized what she had said. Finally, he dropped his eyes to the chair that stood waiting for him. What? Me? I'd rather not, he paused. I don't have any ability to judge. Oh, that is not true, returned the quick reply, tinged now with a hint of sarcasm. You have already proven yourself very capable. Even in our short time together, you have judged the actions and even the motivations of others, as if you somehow knew what those were in truth. You have judged the color of skin and body language and body odor. You have judged history and relationships. You have even judged the value of a person's life by the quality of your concept of beauty. By all accounts, you are quite well practiced in the activity. Mac felt shame reddening his face. He had to admit he had done an awful lot of judging in his time. But he was no different than anyone else, was he? Who doesn't jump to conclusions about others from the way they impact us? There it was again, his self-centered view of the world around him. He looked up and saw her, peering intently at him, and quickly looked down again. Tell me, she inquired, if I may ask, by what criteria do you base your judgments? Mac looked up and tried to meet her gaze, but found that when he looked directly at her, his thinking wavered. To peer into her eyes and keep a train of coherent and logical thought seemed impossible. He had to look away and into the darkness of the corner of the room, hoping to collect himself. Nothing that seems to make much sense at the moment, he finally admitted, his voice faltering. I confess that when I made those judgments, I felt quite justified. But now, of course you did, she said it like a statement of fact, like something routine, not playing for even a moment upon his evident shame and distress. Judging requires that you think yourself superior over the one you judge. Well, today you will be given the opportunity to put all your ability to use. Come on, she said, patting the back of the chair. I want you to sit here now. Hesitantly but obediently, he walked toward her and the waiting chair. With each step, he seemed to grow smaller, or they grew larger. He couldn't tell which. He crawled up on the chair and felt childish with the massive desktop in front of him and his feet barely touching the floor. Excuse me. And just what will I be judging? He asked, turning to look up at her. Now what? Not what? She paused and moved to the side of the desk. Who? His discomfort was growing in leaps and bounds, and sitting in an oversized regal chair didn't help. What right did he have to judge anyone? Sure, in some measure, he probably was guilty of judging almost everyone he had met and many that he had not. Mac knew that he was thoroughly guilty for being self-centered. How dare he judge anyone else? All his judgments had been superficial, based on appearance and actions, things easily interpreted by whatever state of mind or prejudice that supported the need to exalt himself or to feel safe or to belong. He also knew that he was starting to panic. Your imagination, she interrupted his train of thought, is not serving you well at the moment. At this moment. No kidding, Sherlock, is what he thought, but all that came out of his mouth was a weak, I really can't do this. Whether you can or cannot is yet to be determined, she said with a smile, and my name is not Sherlock. Mac was grateful for the darkened room that hid his embarrassment. The silence that followed seemed to hold him captive for much longer than the few seconds it actually took to find his voice and finally ask the question. So, who is it that I'm supposed to judge? God, she paused, and the human race. She said it as if it was of no particular consequence. It simply rolled off her tongue as if this were a daily occurrence. Mac was dumbfounded. "You have got to be kidding," he exclaimed. "Why not? Surely there are many people in your world, excuse me, you think deserve judgment. There must be at least a few who are to blame for so much of the pain and suffering. What about the greedy who feed off the poor of the world? What about the ones who sacrifice their young children to war? What about the men who beat their wives? Mackenzie, what about the fathers who beat their sons for no reason but to assuage their own suffering? Don't they deserve judgment, Mackenzie?" Mac could sense the depths of his unresolved anger rising like a flood of fury. He sat back into the chair, trying to maintain his balance against an onslaught of images, but he could feel his control ebbing away. His stomach knotted as he clenched his fists, his breathing coming short and quick. And what about the man who preys on innocent little girls? What about him, Mackenzie? Is that man guilty? Should he be judged? "Yes," screamed Mac. "Damn him to hell." "Is he to blame for your loss?" "Yes." "What about his father, the man who twisted his son into a terror? What about him?" "Yes, him too." "How far do we go back, Mackenzie? This legacy of brokenness goes all the way back to Adam. What about him?" "But why stop there? What about God? God started this whole thing. Is God to blame?" Mac was reeling. He didn't feel like a judge at all, but rather the one on trial. The woman was unrelenting. "Isn't this where you are stuck, Mackenzie? Isn't this what fuels the great sadness? That God cannot be trusted, surely. A father like you can judge the Father." Again, his anger rose like a towering flame. He wanted to lash out, but she was right, and there was no point in denying it. She continued, "Isn't that your just complaint, Mackenzie, that God has failed you? That he failed Missy? That before the creation, God knew that one day your Missy would be brutalized, and he still created. And then he allowed that twisted soul to snatch her from your loving arms when he had the power to stop him. Isn't God to blame, Mackenzie?" Mac was looking down at the floor, a flurry of images pulling his emotions in every direction. Finally, he said it louder than he intended and pointed his finger right at her. "Yes, God is to blame." The accusation hung in the room as the gavel fell in his heart. "Then," she said with finality, "if you are able to judge God so easily, then you certainly can judge the world." Again, she spoke without emotion. "You must choose 2 of your children to spend eternity in God's new heavens and new earth, but only 2. "What?" he erupted, turning to her in disbelief. "And you must choose 3 of your children to spend eternity in hell." Mac couldn't believe what he was hearing and started to panic. "Mackenzie," her voice now came as calm and wonderful as first he heard it, "I am only asking you to do something that you believe God does. He knows every person ever conceived, and he knows them so much deeper and clearer than you ever will. Know your own children. He loves each one according to his knowledge of the being of that son or daughter. You believe he will condemn most to an eternity of torment away from his presence and apart from his love. Is that not true? I suppose I do. I've just never thought about it like this. He was stumbling over his words in his shock. I just assumed that somehow God could do that. Talking about hell was always sort of an abstract conversation, not about anyone that I truly... Mac hesitated, realizing that what he was about to say would sound ugly. Not about anyone that I truly cared about. So you suppose then that God does this easily, but you cannot. Come now, Mackenzie. Which 3 of your 5 children will you sentence to hell? Katie is struggling with you the most right now. She treats you badly and has said hurtful things to you. Perhaps she is the first and most logical choice. What about her? You're the judge, Mackenzie, and you must choose. I don't want to be the judge, she said, standing up. Mac's mind was racing. This couldn't be real. How could God ask him to choose among his own children? There was no way he could sentence Katie or any of his other children to an eternity in hell just because she had sinned against him. Even if Katie or Josh or John or Tyler committed some heinous crime, he still wouldn't do it. He couldn't. For him, it wasn't about their performance. It was about his love for them. I can't do this, he said softly. You must, she replied. I can't do this, he said louder and more vehemently. You must, she said. Again, her voice softer. I will not do this, Mac yelled in his... I will not do this, Mac yelled, his blood boiling hot inside him. You must, she whispered. I can't, I won't, he screamed, and now the words and emotions came tumbling out. The woman just stood watching and waiting, and finally he looked at her, pleading with his eyes. Could I go instead? If you need someone to torture for eternity, I'll go in their place. Will that work? Could I do that? He fell at her feet, crying and begging now. Please let me go for my children. Please, I would be happy to. Please, I am begging you. Please, please. Mackenzie, she whispered, and her words came like a splash of cool water on a brutally hot day. Her hands gently touched his cheeks as she lifted him to his feet. Looking at her through blurring tears, he could see that her smile was radiant. Now you sound like Jesus. You have judged well, Mackenzie. I'm so proud of you. But I haven't judged anything, Mac offered in confusion. Oh, but you have. You have judged them worthy of love, even if it costs you everything. That is how Jesus loves. When he hears the words, he thought of his new friend waiting by the lake. When he heard the words, he thought of his new friend waiting by the lake. And now you know Papa's heart, she added, who loves all his children perfectly. Immediately, Missy's image flashed in his mind, and he found himself bristling. Without thinking, he lifted himself back onto the chair. What just happened, Mackenzie? She asked. He saw no use trying to hide it. I understand Jesus is love, but God is another story. I don't find them to be alike at all. At all. You haven't enjoyed your time with Papa? She asked, surprised. No, I love Papa, whoever she is. She's amazing, but she's not anything like the God I've known. Maybe your understanding of God is wrong. Maybe I just don't see how God loved Missy perfectly. So the judgment continues, she said with a sadness in her voice. That made Mac pause, but only for a moment. What am I supposed to think? I just don't understand how God could love Missy and let her go through that horror. She was innocent. She didn't do anything to deserve that. I know. Matt continued on. Did God use her to punish me for what I did to my father? That isn't fair. She didn't deserve this. Nan didn't deserve this. Tears streamed down his face. I might have, but they didn't. Is that who your God is, Mackenzie? It is no wonder you are drowning in your sorrow. Papa isn't like that, Mackenzie. She's not punishing you or Missy or Nan. This was not his doing. But he didn't stop it. No, he didn't. He doesn't stop a lot of things that cause him pain. Your world is severely broken. You demanded your independence, and now you are angry with the one who loved you enough to give it to you. Nothing is as it should be, as Papa desires it to be, and as it will be one day. Right now, your world is lost in darkness and chaos, and horrible things happen to those he is especially fond of. Then why doesn't he do something about it? He already has. You mean what Jesus did? Haven't you seen the wounds on Papa too? I didn't understand them. How could he, for love? He chose the way of the cross, where mercy triumphs over justice because of love. Would you instead prefer he'd chosen justice for everyone? Do you want justice, dear judge? And she smiled as she said it. No, I don't, he said as he lowered his head. Not for me and not for my children. She waited, but I still don't understand why Missy had to die. She didn't have to, Mackenzie. This was no plan of Papa's. Papa has never needed evil to accomplish his good purposes. It is you humans who have embraced evil, and Papa has responded with goodness. What happened to Missy was the work of evil, and no one in your world is immune from it. But it hurts so much. There must be a better way. There is. You just can't see it now. Return from your independence, Mackenzie. Give up being his judge and know Papa for who he is. Then you will be able to embrace his love in the midst of your pain. Instead of pushing him away with your self-centered perception of how you think the universe should be, Papa has crawled inside your world to be with you, to be with Missy. Max stood up from the chair. I don't want to be a judge anymore. I really do want to trust Papa. Unnoticed by Mac, the room lightened yet again as he moved around the table toward the simple chair where it all began. But I'll need help. She reached out and hugged Mac. Now, that sounds like the start of the trip home, Mackenzie. It certainly does. The quiet of the cavern was so suddenly broken by the sound of children's laughter. It seemed to be coming through one of the walls, which Mac could now see clearly as the room continued to brighten. Excuse me. As he stared in that direction, the stone surface grew increasingly translucent and daylight filtered into the cave. Startled, Mac peered through the haze and finally could make out vague shapes of children playing in the distance. Those sound like my kids, Mac exclaimed, his mouth open in astonishment. Moving to the wall, the mist parted like someone had drawn a curtain, and he was unexpectedly looking out across a meadow back toward the lake. In front of him loomed the backdrop of high, snow-covered mountains, perfect in their majesty, dressed in heavily wooded forests, and nestled at their feet. He could clearly see the shack where he knew Papa and Sarayu would be waiting for him. Excuse me. A large stream tumbled out of nowhere directly in front of him and flowed into the lake alongside fields of high country, flowers, and grasses. The sounds of birds were everywhere, and the sweet scent of summer hung rich in the air. Excuse me. All this Max saw, heard, and smelled in an instant, but Then his gaze was drawn to movement, to the group playing along an eddy near where the stream flowed into the lake less than 50 yards away. He saw his children there, John, Tyler, Josh, and Kate. But wait, there was another. He gasped, trying to focus more intently. Excuse me. Moving toward them, he pushed up against an unseen force, as if the stone wall were still invisibly in front of him. Then it became clear. Missy! There she was, kicking her bare feet in the water. As if she heard him, Missy broke from the group and came running down the trail that ended directly in front of him. "Oh my God, Missy," he yelled, and tried to move forward through the veil that had held them separate. To his consternation, he ran into a power that would not allow him to get closer. As if some magnetic force increased in direct opposition to his effort, deflecting him back into the room. "She cannot hear you." Mac didn't care. "Missy!" he screamed. She was so close. The memory that he had been trying so hard not to lose, but had felt slowly slipping away, now snapped back. He looked for some kind of a handhold, as if he could pry whatever it was open and find some way to get through to his daughter. But there was nothing. Meanwhile, Missy had arrived and stood directly in front of him. Her gaze was clearly not at them, but at something that was in between, larger and obviously visible to her, but not to him. Mac finally quit fighting the force field and half turned to the woman. "Can she see me? Does she know that I'm here?" he asked desperately. "She knows that you are here, but she cannot see you. From her side, she is looking at the beautiful waterfall and nothing more. But she knows you are behind it." "Waterfalls," Mac exclaimed, laughing to himself. She just can't get enough of waterfalls. Now Mac focused on her, trying to memorize again every detail of her expression and hair and hands. As he did so, Missy's face erupted in a huge smile, dimples standing out in slow motion with great exaggeration. He could see her mouth the words, "It's okay, and now she signed the words, "Love you." It was too much. Mac wept for joy. Still, he couldn't stop looking at her, watching her through his own cascading waterfall. To be this close again was painful. To see her stand in that Missy way with one leg forward and a hand on her hip, wrist inward. She's really okay, isn't she? More than you know, this life is only the anteroom of a greater reality to come. No one reaches their potential in your world. It's only preparation for what Papa had in mind all along. "Can I get to her? Maybe just one hug and a kiss?" he begged quietly. "No, this is the way she wanted it." "She wanted it this way?" Mac was confused. "Yes. She's a very wise child, our Missy. I'm especially fond of her." "Are you sure she knows I'm here?" "Yes, I am sure," she assured Mac. "She has been very excited for this day, to play with her brothers and sister and to be near you. She very much would have liked her mother to be here too. But that will wait for another time." Mac turned toward the woman. "Are my other children really here?" "They are here, but they aren't. Only Missy is truly here. The others are dreaming, and each will have a vague memory of this. Some in greater detail than others, but none fully, completely. This is a very peaceful time of sleep for each of them, except Kate. This dream will not be easy for her. Missy, though, is fully awake." Mac watched every move his precious Missy was making. "Has she forgiven me?" he asked. "Forgiven you for what?" "I failed her," he whispered. It would be her nature to forgive if there were anything to forgive, which there is not. But I didn't stop him from taking her. He took her while I wasn't paying attention. His voice trailed off. If you remember, you were saving your son. Only you in the entire universe believe that somehow you are to blame. Missy doesn't believe that, nor Nan nor Papa. Perhaps it's time to let that go, that lie. And Mackenzie, even if you had been to blame, her love is much stronger than your fault could ever be. Just then, someone called Missy's name, and Mac recognized the voice. She shrieked with delight and started to run back toward the others. Abruptly, she stopped and ran back to her daddy. She made a big embrace, as if she were hugging him, and with eyes closed, over-exaggerated a kiss. From behind the barrier, he hugged her back. For a moment, she stood completely still, as if knowing she was giving him a gift for his memory. Waved, turned, and raced back to the others. And now Matt could clearly see the voice that had called his Missy. It was Jesus. Playing in the middle of his children, without hesitation, Missy leaped into his arms. He swung her around twice before putting her back on her feet, and then everyone laughed before hunting for smooth stones to skip across the surface of the lake. The voicing of their joy was a symphony to Mac's ears, and as he watched, his tears flowed freely. Suddenly, without warning, water roared down from above directly in front of him and obliterated all the sights and sounds of his children. Instinctively, he jumped back. He now realized that the walls of the cave had dissolved around him, and he was standing in a grotto on the backside of the waterfall. Mac felt the woman's hands on his shoulders. Is it over? He asked. For now, she replied tenderly. Mackenzie, judgment is not about destruction, but about setting things right. Max smiled. I don't feel stuck anymore. She steered him gently toward the side of the waterfall until he could once again see Jesus on the shore, still skipping stones. I think someone is waiting for you. Her hand softly squeezed and then left his shoulders, and Mac knew without looking that she was gone. And after carefully climbing over slippery boulders and across wet rocks, he found a way around the edge of the falls, then through the refreshing mist of tumbling water and back into daylight. Exhausted but deeply fulfilled, Mac paused and closed his eyes for a moment, trying to etch the details of Missy's presence indelibly into his mind, hoping that in the days to come, he would be able to bring back every moment with her, every nuance and movement, and suddenly he missed Nan so very much